research. And the most recent one that we did, which has been read very wide across the globe, is the poverty research which the Ministry of Finance supported us to do. When we started having challenges in the industry, I went back to that research and I asked myself, all the recommendations that came out of that research is showing now what we do. Unfortunately, some of the proposals that were in it have come to pass. And I believe that the rest is left to us to look at it and then develop further from that angle. The person I'm talking about was quite recently elevated to become the national statistician. And for some of us, we're not surprised. And Prof, permit me to use this word. I wasn't surprised because of his greed for data. Prof, anytime I see his call, yo, what is the data in the industry telling us? And I will not be surprised today if he still challenges us to do well when it comes to issues of data. So on this note, shall we all welcome our brother, an industry man and a champion of microfinance, in the name of Professor Anim.
Madam Chair, members on the high table, permit me to stand on all the recommendations that have been made implicit in the introduction and say that I'm not greedy for data. I'm passionate about data. On that note, let me stand on the introductions that have been made and let me say good morning, ladies and gentlemen. What I want to do today really is to reflect on what an institution should do after 10 years. And from my point of view, you deserve all the congratulatory messages that have been shared with you. But as part of my keynote address, I see a 10-year anniversary as a stock-taking exercise. So the first part of my delivery would touch on certain things that I feel that we should reflect on after 10 years. Then I would move into the context in which MCAG is operating, share with you some limited data on issues happening on the global front and the national front. Then the third area, I'm going to look at some thoughts that I think MCAG moving into your next 10 years, you need to begin to think about and share with members, concluding remarks. But before I leave, I'll just take 1 minute to talk about the census. The reason is that, as Yao said, as a national statistician, for every platform that I mount, our major activity, I need to talk about it. So I start by congratulating you once again for having gone through 10 years of engagement. And my own friend Lawrence, I congratulate you for thinking through this 10 years ago, and today we all stand to see the benefits of it. The other thing I want to talk about before I go into the stock taking is a couple of caveats. And Yao, thank you for bringing that up. When Ebenezer approached me for this exercise, I said to Ebenezer, it's going to be tight because with the position that you hold, you are not too sure where you'll be sent to any moment in time. But I'm hoping and pray that I'll be in the country and I'll get the necessary data to talk about this. I tried. Data on microfinance is non-existent. Data on Ghana on microfinance is non-existent. This is a problem. It is a problem in the sense that you cannot plan any intervention if you don't have a historical perspective of how far you've gone. I tried going to GAMFIN. I asked of the performance benchmarking and monitoring booklet that they had been publishing up until 2014, and my good friend Yao mentioned that for one reason or the other, as a country, we are not doing that. Again, as Yao said, 2015 was the last time that as a country we took stock of performance of institutions and also demand side issues. 4 years up until now, there's no information, there's no data available. It doesn't make my work as a keynote speaker difficult, but it tells us straight in the face that as a country we have challenges. Bank of Ghana has taken up the mandate to sanitize the sector, and I'm going to talk about it during my concluding remark. But the data that Bank of Ghana is striving on to sanitize the sector is only a part of what microfinance is expected to do. It's only looking at the prudential side. But for all of us who got into microfinance, we know that microfinance at the minimum is double-edged, in which case you look at the social dimension and the financial dimension. I'm putting this point up front because one of the strong recommendations I'm going to make at the end of my speech is that the sanitizing exercise should be comprehensive by looking at both the prudential and the non-prudential aspects. Looking at only the prudential aspect simply says to our face that microfinance is losing the battle on the poverty reduction perspective. So these are the two caveats in terms of information around the sector and data that we need to plan for the sector. Ladies and gentlemen, as I tried looking at this exercise, I said, let me go to MCAG's website. Let me look at the letter that they sent to me. So if I want to take stock, this is where I'm going to get information. I looked at the letter, and the first thing that I saw had to do with the motto of MCAG. And the motto of MCAG is integrity, excellent services, and partnership. Then I started reflecting that with the schools that I've been to all this while, what has been our motto? One of them, my primary school, Datus, it says knowledge is power. So there's an input and there's an output. You get knowledge, you get power. Another school says perseverance conquers all. You persevere an input, you conquer an output. Then I asked myself, 10 years, MCAG, I want to take stock. Our motto is integrity, excellent services, partnership. Then I say, what are the outputs? What are the indicators for measuring outputs? So some of the thoughts that came to mind is that one output is that if I have integrity, I'm going to improve the prudential performance of all members. Another output that came to mind is that if I have integrity, and as was said earlier on, I'm going to contribute to financial development. Then a deeper question that comes in there is, if I want to contribute to financial development, which dimension of financial development am I contributing to? Is it about the stability of the sector? Then I said, step back. If it's about the stability of the sector, and as Ebenezer said earlier on, 31 of our members have had challenges with BOG. Are we achieving that? 10 years down the line, this is what we have to look at. Another thing that came to mind, which I'm very passionate about when it comes to the financial sector, is the issue of financial intermediation. A lot of us see financial intermediation as simply getting money from those who have excess and giving money to those who don't have. And again, I want to emphasize, reiterate the point that was made earlier on. MCAG is not deposit taking. So you don't take deposits. So you are not going to look for those with excesses, but you're going to provide money for those who need it. But that is not financial intermediation. Financial intermediation really has to do with resource allocation. As a financial provider, you think through the landscape of an economy and you ask yourself, which of the sectors would drive the Ghanaian economy? Then you move money from the sectors that will less drive the economy to the sectors that are going to drive the economy. That is financial intermediation. So if you are providing excellent services, are your services geared towards resource allocation? Second reflection on the motto, which has to do with integrity, excellent services, and partnership. The third thing that I looked at in terms of an indicator is startup and growth of businesses. And Ebenezer, I'm happy you talked about the cocoa seller. Is that the kind of demonstration that we want to do about our services? If you are talking about integrity, we should begin to think about the number of cocoa sellers that we've upskilled. And it's going to be one of the issues that I'm going to talk about. You start at a cocoa seller, to what extent do we ensure that your business expands to 3 branches, 4 branches, and if it's your aim not to stay as a cocoa seller, what do you eventually want to be? And as MCAG member, what is my role in that? Then the fourth area has to do with poverty reduction. At that point, I said, don't move further. Don't add any indicators to it. Let's look at what we have as objectives and let's see what we have as areas of strategic focus. So again, I delved deeper into the website and I came up with 4 objectives and 8 areas of strategic focus. And when I got there, I was happy to see that these objectives and strategic focus have been clearly listed in the booklet that was shared to us. Ladies and gentlemen, with your permission, let's turn to this document and let's see the strategic objectives. A number of us have it. I'm talking about this document. Okay, so for those of us who have it, in the interest of time, I don't want to go over them. So I quickly read through these objectives and areas of strategic focus. And again, I want you to look at it, but I'm going to move on. Again, I sat back and I said, let me reflect. So the first thought that came to mind is, what is the level of alignment between the objectives, areas of strategic focus, and the motto of MCAG? So as I said earlier on, MCAG focused on integrity, excellent services, and partnership. Then we have a set of areas of strategic focus and objectives. Clearly, the indicators that I came up with as outcome indicators or possibly impact indicators were not fully measured out of the areas of strategic focus. One area that was completely missing, if you go through it, is the fact that all 8 areas of strategic focus plus the objectives do not touch on a customer-centric approach. All the issues that we see in there are one-sided in terms of the institution approach. It is possible, it's right, and it is assumed, it is inherent in the fact that once you make the institutions strong, performing well, it will naturally translate. But moving into the next 10 years, I think we need to look at this carefully. Because from a development economics point of view, the argument of things trickling down, we've moved. I was happy when you were making your earlier submission, you talk about interventions that are bottom up. Things are not expected to happen automatically. So there is the need to think about a customer-centric approach. The other issue that came up had to do with the level of transparency in terms of operations and performance. Financial services, financial intermediation thrives on trust. So as a financial institution, if you are putting information out there, or as an association of financial institutions, if you are putting information out there, you would hardly have to miss the issue of transparency. Because that is the basis by which we talk about financial knowledge. To a very large extent, when we talk about financial literacy, we only think about it from the perspective of financial education, based on campaigns that we mount. But we don't think about it from the perspective of the extent to which we make full and complete information available to beneficiaries, to empower them to make the necessary decision. So transparency was completely missing, and I asked myself, should we reflect on this moving into the next 10 years? The third issue that came up, are they really delivering microcredit services? And this morning I was talking to one of your colleagues and he said, maybe you might want to share with them that they are doing microcredit services. This problem would be averted if on the website of MCAG you clearly publicize the information that we need. So that if I'm somebody who needs 50 Ghana cedis and I go there and I see that all the institutions are offering 50,000 Ghana cedis and above, I know that MCAG is not a place to go. So we need to reflect back, and for those of us who are following issues in the industry, take some time and look at the Microfinance Barometer 2019, which looks at different country experiences where they clearly indicate what microcredit is in terms of amount. So now as general public, we are oblivious of the amount that microcredit institutions are putting out there. And this is where MCAG would have to come in. You don't have to do it at the individual institution level. You anonymize the data if you want to do it that way, or in the worst case, you do it at the aggregated level. The fourth issue that came to mind confirmed the argument that it is really not customer-centric. So we needed to reflect on it more. So having looked at the motto, the objectives, and the strategic focus, I said to myself that all the blame should not be pushed to the operations of MCAG. We need to look at what is happening in the global context. So that is what pushed me to my second area. Then I looked into the global context and I realized that whatever challenges that we are having in Ghana is not a peculiar situation. Countries like India, even Bangladesh, have had their own share of what is happening in the microfinance sector. This is principally because of maybe our inability to understand the sector from both ends, the beneficiary side and the supply side. So in that data, it clearly tells us that in terms of outreach, there has been a reduction from 211 million in 2013 customers to about 113 in 2017. There's still high cost of operations, and I was not surprised he talked about it. So it's happening at a global level as well. Then for my interest, which has to do with impact analysis both from the financial side and the poverty side, the evidence continues to be mixed. So we need to reflect on what microfinance can do and what microfinance cannot do. So towards the end, I would make some emphatic statement that although we continue to push microfinance, for the fact that it's reflected in the SDGs, we should know that it's just a part of the cake. And as stakeholders, we need to go and look for the other part of the cake to ensure that we can tap into the right synergy. Then I came to the national level in terms of performance, and this is what I mentioned earlier on. You search for data, you search for data, you search for data, you don't get. I contacted my good friend Yao, data was not available. Then I said, let me go into my old database that I've been working on for some time now. I get into this database again through the help of GAMFIN, Ministry of Finance. Census of microfinance institutions was done around 2014. And that data pointed to the fact that as a country we had in excess of 3,000 micro institutions parading as microfinance institutions. It was at that point that I said to myself, what is MCAG? Because I was not too sure how MCAG varied from MLAG. In the 2015 exercise, we knew of 7 institutions, apex institutions. Then again, I said, no, let me go back to the MCAG website and see whether it's MLAG or it's MCAG. Then in that website, you are not too clear whether it's MCAG or MLAG. Because the profile on the website has information on MLAG. But I'm here to see where it transitioned. So now, as a layperson, I was pushed to make a call to other people in the industry. Then they educated me that at some point, given the perceptions and so on about money lenders, Bank of Ghana accepted the request to change its mandate from MLAG to MCAG. Then I said, let's go back and look at what the perceptions were as far as microfinance institutions were concerned. And doing my research around 2008, 2009, one of the major issues had to do with usury interest rates, high interest rate. And once you talk about that, it's MLAG that comes up. And for those of you who are privy to the book, Economics of Microfinance, there was a chapter that was written by our own good friend, Dr. David Anda and William Steele, who did some analysis on differential microfinance rates in Ghana. And in that book, they point to interest rate of MLAG in excess of 100%, whereas the average for the other microfinance institutions ranged around 30–40%. So the immediate question that came to mind after the transition of name from MLAG to MCAG, whether it also translated in terms of interest rates. unfortunately, I was unable to respond to that. So within country, we are having challenges with data, and evidence on impact analysis is equally mixed. So having gone through these challenges, I said, I'm better off being silent on the extent of data issues in the country and share with you some thoughts as far as moving into the 10 years is concerned. So the first issue that I put on the floor is, as MCAG, it is your responsibility to develop a framework for institutional maturation. If you are an Apex institution, you have over 600 members, and you don't have a framework which says that 30 of them, assuming you have 4 categories within MCAG, 30 of them hypothetically would move into tier 2 in the next 3 years, will move again into tier 4 in the next 5 years, and will move into tier 5, whatever number of categories. Then as MCAG, you need to review your operations, because your output to the organization would have to be felt. So institutional maturation is critical. The second issue that I thought is worth sharing with you, as I said earlier on, is development of a framework for client upscaling. This is not the responsibility of MCAG, this is the responsibility of members. MCAG has the responsibility of developing a framework for institutional maturation, and as institutions, you have the responsibility of developing your own framework as credit officers to upskill clients. Then the third issue has to do with digitized system. So I touch on one for MCAG, I touch on the other for microcredit institutions. There is the need to think about strategies by which we can reduce the operational cost for microcredit institutions. And one way you may want to think about, which you cannot shy away from, is adopting a centralized digitized system to handle some of the activities which are manually done. As a country, we are not harnessing the technology era that we are in now. Permit me to digress a little bit on some of the observations that we saw at Ghana Statistical Service when we were developing the Quarter 2 2019 GDP. Information and communication subsector on a year-on-year basis grew by 52.8%. And this growth of 52.8% was largely driven by the use of data. So I wore my academic hat and I said, dig deep and look at what we need as a country for sustained growth. So I was looking out for growth in terms of computer programming. And growth in terms of computer programming on a year-on-year basis, Quarter 2 2018 to Quarter 2 2019 was negative 24%. This calls for reflection at the national level, and obviously for MCAG, it's a call for you to think about a centralized digitized system which would, in the long run, it has a heavy initial cost outlay, but in the long run, take off the considerable high cost of operations. The second one for microcredit institutions, product diversification. We are so restricted in the space of credit, and we do not think about synergies with the other financial products. We need to go back and reflect on this. We have some customers that need a variety of services. It's not all the customers that would come to you with credit and would want to stay with you for forever with credit. There is an opportunity, there is new literature which suggests that while you do not take deposits, there are other services that you can. And obviously you need Bank of Ghana to sanction that. But the huge potential in driving people out of poverty is not in the single financial service that you provide. It's the scope of the financial services, and more importantly, the uniqueness that each beneficiary would attach to the mix of financial products. And that is the responsibility of microcredit institutions and not MCAG. Another issue that I thought I should share with you moving forward has to do with an appreciation of the extent of exclusion, and the issue of discouraged beneficiaries. As a country, we've not reflected on it more. We put out figures ranging between 35% to 50%, depending on the measure of financial inclusion, and we say let's put in efforts to do that. What we fail to do is to step back and look at the depth of exclusion and why the person is not excluded. There are two sides to it. One person might be excluded because the person simply doesn't want to be with a microfinance, microcredit institution. Another side is that because of what is happening in the industry, there's institutional exclusion. And now what we are experiencing as a country is a national exclusion. People feel that there's some stigma associated with being identified as a client of a microfinance institution. If MCAG, microcredit institutions, you don't tackle this issue head on, all of us in the industry would have challenges. For those of us who are trainers, we are not getting trainees. For those of you who rely on a clientele base, they are thinking about whether to work with you or otherwise. So more or less now, you are working with people who are loyal to a very large extent. We'll better appreciate how to deal with this if we get into the extent of exclusion and the sources of exclusion. That is the only way we can deal with this issue. So I encourage you into the 10 years to look at debates around these issues. The last issue I want to share with you has to do with the skewness of microcredit associations. And this relates to the impact indicators that I talked about. It came to me as news to hear the chairperson indicate that you have over 600 institutions, when on your website I see that institutions since 2016, that's the phrase, you compute and it's 362. The phrase is since. So as a statistician, I was not too sure whether the data was really since 2016, which would include 2019, or it was really at 2016 or 2019. But for this update, I want to believe that that information is 2016. On that premise, I said, what proportion do we have in Greater Accra region? In excess of 200. What proportion do we have in Ashanti region? Is in excess of 50. You put the two together, it's about 74% out of the total. So 3/4 of the institutions are concentrated in Greater Accra and Ashanti region. The other half of microfinance paradigm would definitely suffer. Having shared with you these, I move on to some concluding statements and recommendations. So my first concluding statement is that, in my own opinion, the current happenings in the microfinance sector in Ghana, both the challenges and the proposed interventions, suggest that we are losing the poverty orientation of microfinance. The second issue is that there is evidence that from the impact analysis that microfinance cannot be a standalone intervention. If we want to change our fortunes as far as development is concerned, we need to think about the synergies that microfinance needs, identify those synergies, and see how we can combine them to hasten and deepen the fight against poverty. The third concluding statement brings us hope, and I mentioned that earlier on. The SDGs, which focuses on eliminating poverty in all its forms and everywhere. For the sake of emphasis, I repeat that. Eliminating poverty in all its forms, not only financial forms, and everywhere, not only Greater Accra and Ashanti region. Identifies microfinance as a strategy that brings us hope. Goodwill for microfinance is still there. Our ability to thrive on that goodwill to sustain all of us in the industry, including my own colleague who is heading Offset at Bank of Ghana, is to see how we can rationalize this moving forward. MCAG specific recommendations. You should reassess the expectations and scope from your motto, your objectives, and your areas of strategic focus. I've emphasized on it, and my recommendation is that let's go back, reflect on it more. At the minimum, let's indicate the outcome indicators, and in 10 years from today, if we come to speak, we'll use the indicators as basis to say that this is how far we've achieved it, this is how far we're not able to achieve it, and identify strategies moving forward on how to do things better. The fourth issue has to do with the need to publicize data, and as I talked about, with that data we have no business thinking about how we can improve on the things that we do. And yeah, thank you very much for setting the tone for me, because definitely I could not have had this keynote address without talking about data and how it informs development. My colleague from Bank of Ghana, I mentioned it and I'm reiterating that point. The sanitizing exercise would only be half-baked if we continue the way we are doing it. I said this a couple of years back and I'm repeating it today. Prudential is not only the way to go as far as the industry is concerned. The industry has to think about both prudential and non-prudential components. The only way for Bank of Ghana to do that is to continue collaborating with institutions that have the mandate to look at the non-prudential aspects. That is the only way by which we can sanitize the sector. My last recommendation has a governmental twist. So we need to look at it carefully, reflect on it, and see how we can utilize it to improve on what we need in the sector. The first one of the two has to do with we as stakeholders in microfinance having confidence in what government is doing as far as sanitizing the sector is concerned. On the program, I saw that a colleague from Maslog was going to be here. I'm not too sure if he's here or not. I would have been happy if my colleague was here. I've made this point and I'm going to make it again. One way to sanitize the sector for us stakeholders to have confidence in what the government is doing is to redesignate the entire concept of Maslog. The concept of Maslog sends a certain mindset in the minds of us as stakeholders, especially when its areas of operations are not too clear. Retail financing, we are not too sure. Development aid, we are not too sure. Instead of the way Maslog is running now, what we should do at the governmental level is the setting up of credit reference bureaus. And I must commend MCAG, one of their 8 strategic areas, they talked about credit referencing bureau. We talked about this in 2004 when we started engaging with the sector. 15 years down the line, we've still not held on to this. So this argument about we are not a deposit-taking institution, we will not go around it. As far back as 2004, we identified institutions that are not deposit-taking. Instead, what they were doing was to get their customers to be with institutions that are deposit-taking, with an umbrella name in their institutions as non-deposit-taking and indirectly taking deposits. The only way to deal with this problem is to create a database that we can clearly reference who is doing what and who is taking what. For the sake of emphasis, Maslog would have to be rephased as a country, and in place of Maslog, the investment that goes there, we can use it for credit referencing. Thank you very much. As I indicated, thank you. As I indicated, permit me 1 minute to talk about the census. It's important for all of us because with all the things that I've talked about, if we don't have census, we wouldn't know how to proceed. The reason being that census is the base by which we did the 2015 exercise. Census is the base by which we did the 2004 exercise. And as a country and for an international recommendation, every country would have to do a population and housing census every 10 years. March 2020 would be our 6th post-independence census as a country, And I'm using this platform to encourage all of you to join in the advert for it. It is critical, as I say, on all platforms for 3 reasons. It is the only activity that would give us the levels of disaggregation that we want. It is the only activity that would give us the denominator for every socioeconomic, including microfinance, health, social intervention that we institute. If we don't have census, I couldn't have stand here and talk about we saying that we are not in Upper West, Upper East, where poverty is more pronounced than Greater Accra and Ashanti region. So census obviously gives us the denominator that we need. And thirdly, census is the only exercise that talks about distribution. So the 204 MCAC that I talked about, what is the proportional population that is serving? For all you know, given the proportional differences, 204 as against Greater Accra population should not be an issue. And the one for Upper West as against their population is possibly right. So census is what gives us the base in terms of disaggregation, denominator, and distribution. So please, I'm counting on you moving forward to tout the message that census is the single most important priority of every government. Thank you.
We shall now have a short message from the Deputy Eastern Regional Minister.
Focus on Rural Bank. Focus on Rural Bank brings to you stories of our various rural banks. We get to learn of the goals they've set, the success stories they have chalked.
We are among the top 10 rural banks in Ghana, and we record significant growth in almost all our performance indicators.